Good morning, everyone. Thank you to Zoe and to Ken for helping to produce this event this morning. And we want to welcome every Beacon member as well as the many guests that are on the program. We're very fortunate because we have a large group today. It's obviously a very compelling subject, and we have a wonderful speaker for you. The program is being recorded, and also our speaker has agreed to let us record the presentation. So for everyone who is on the program today, you will be getting an email in the very near future, next day or two, which will provide access to you to the slides, the full slide presentation. And that plus the recording can also really help you to review the information and get a deeper dive and study the material. So my name is Ford Myers. I've been a Beacon member for quite a long time, actually since the very beginning. And I'm also chair of the subgroup Job Search and Career Development. My co-chair, Ken Schur, is also on the line. I'm sure many of you know him, and he's assisting today and helping out. And Ken has been really instrumental and helpful in getting these programs delivered to all of you. So we're going to go through some introductory slides first, then introduce our speaker. Let's begin. So to speak a little bit about Beacon in general, this is primarily for our guests, of course. It's a very influential network of thought leaders throughout the Delaware Valley and beyond. And we really focus on opportunities for networking and connecting and education and professional development for seasoned, experienced executives. There's a culture of exchange and generosity. There's a lot of knowledge and connections that are shared. We really provide access, advice, referrals, and it's just a wonderful community in the Philadelphia region. And I encourage everyone to either get more involved in Beacon if you are already a member, or to join and become a member if you have not yet signed up. It's very interesting also to look at the demographics of our membership. Just very briefly, I want to show you this slide, which tells you the level of seniority and influence of our members, also the kinds of companies they work for by size. In terms of the members specifically, you can see where they're located by the regional states, and then also the types of companies, not just the size of their companies, but also the types of companies that they work at. And it's really interesting to see exactly who our membership is comprised of. Going further a little bit into the demographics, you can see here that so many industries are represented. There's something here for just about everyone and every industry. In terms of functions or the roles that our members play within companies, you can see, again, very wide ranging, just about every professional sector you can think of. And specific company names, for those of you who are networking or looking for information about actual companies, you can see this is just a sampling of the kinds of companies that are represented by our members and their experience. To get a little more specific now into our subgroup, Job Search and Career Development, again, we want to welcome you. If you're between jobs or seeking a career you love or focused on improving your current career situation, then this is the group for you. We started this group to really help people with their career development. And one of the tenets of Beacon is ongoing professional development and continuing networking. So these are some of the benefits that people get when they become a member of our subgroup. It's really designed for you to help you maximize your career potential. We also want to hear from you. We certainly welcome your feedback. We want your suggestions and ideas. You know, the group can only thrive and grow with your help and your participation. please feel free to contact either me or Ken anytime you have a thought, a comment, a question, or a complaint about our subgroup. We would really like to hear from you. Our next program, which you should mark down in your calendar, will be on Thursday, May 20th, again at 12 noon. The title will be Top 10 LinkedIn Strategies for 2021. Now, LinkedIn is an extremely popular subject. Every time we do a program related to LinkedIn, we get huge turnout. So try to register soon. Our guest will be Brenda Meller. She is a LinkedIn expert, a national speaker, and she is the Chief Engagement Officer at Meller Marketing. She provides marketing and social media support for individuals and businesses, helping them to achieve their goals. If you want to learn more in advance about Brenda, you can either go to her website, mellermarketing.com, or you can visit her LinkedIn page, which you can see at the bottom of your screen. Please register, please sign up. We'd love to see you next time at our next program on May 20th. And now we're going to shift over to today's program and introduce our speaker, Chris Nadherny. Chris is president of Nadherny and Associates. He was previously a long-term executive search consultant, 30-year career as a search expert, and he was a partner with Spencer Stuart Executive Search. He is also an author of the book, The Proactive Executive, which has a 5-star rating on Amazon. You can learn more about Chris and also learn more about his book by going online. You can find his website at chrisnadherny.com. So I want to turn it over now to Chris and say, welcome, Chris. Thank you so much for being here. We're really looking forward to your presentation. I know it's going to be a great one.
Well, Ford, thank you very much for that nice introduction. Let me see if I can get the slides up here. Everybody see them?
Yes.
Great, great. Well, it is a real pleasure to be with everyone today. I'm an old Philly boy myself and spent several years there going to business school. Today, what I want to do is share a number of thoughts and a framework with which you can think about accelerating your career, with the result being increased advancement, job satisfaction, and compensation. Before I get into the meat of the presentation, let me provide a few additional comments in my background that I think will be additive to the nice introduction that Ford provided. During the time frame that I was with Spencer Stuart, which is a leading global executive search firm, and typically they're operating at the C-suite level, conducting search engagements and board director engagements. During that time frame, I had the opportunity to assess, position, present, and track the careers of over 6,000 senior executives. And what this provided me with was a very deep understanding of how careers are successfully created or diminished. And not only do I selectively coach today through my own firm, but I'm also affiliated with Crenshaw Associates, which is a premier C-suite coaching and transition services firm headquartered out of New York City. I am out of Chicago. The content of my discussion today is going to be around 3 areas that we're going to go into much more deeply. The first topic is identifying the biggest barrier to accelerating your career. The second topic is to provide you an actionable framework with which to think about career velocity. The third area is to discuss career accelerants, both for your professional profile, as well as the types of opportunities that you ultimately see in the market. What I'm not talking about today is performance or work ethic or training and education. I consider those to be givens. What I'm concerned about today is beyond these givens, what is it that ultimately determines your career trajectory? And the answer is essentially your ability to effectively manage your career in a manner that is thoughtful, strategic, and proactive. And it's this factor, in my experience, the ability to effectively manage your career, that explains the difference in career trajectories between equally gifted and motivated professionals. Now, the stark truth in my experience is that the majority of most professionals undermanage their careers. They may not do it consistently, but maybe periodically. And I ask myself, why does this occur? And what the reason that I come out with is that it's just not taught in school. Most of us learn how to manage our career on the job through the school of hard knocks. And the unfortunate thing about that is that by the time you've learned your lessons, you've already done some damage. So I do think schools could do a better job in this respect. I think effective career management is especially critically important in today's uncertain work environment of accelerated change and disruption, which we've certainly seen in the past year. There are also other reasons that I think executives undermanage their careers. There's a belief that if I work hard, everything will take care of itself. I'll be okay. The company's going to look after my development. Or why should I think about this? I'm happy with what I'm doing. Or I'm running 24/7 these days. I'm just too busy to think about this. Well, this type of thinking results in undermanagement. And what that results in are reactive and poorly thought out career moves, job hopping, poor market positioning, and skills that become obsolete. All of these act to decelerate your career. On the other hand, effective career management produces swifter advancement and enhanced job satisfaction. It generates conservatively 35% greater lifetime compensation. And it's often the distinction between good versus great candidates. And it's the great candidates that get the best jobs. Now, the good news underlying all of this is that 50% of your career success is self-determined by factors that are within your control. Here's a framework that I want to share about understanding career acceleration. Career velocity is made up of two variables: the strength of your professional profile, and then the quality of the opportunities that you find yourself in over the course of your career. Most of you, I hope, have received the EPAM self-diagnostic and have had a chance to take that in a very objective and honest manner. This will help us talk about your professional profile. When I talk about the strength of an opportunity, it's the setting or the ability that you have within that opportunity to create a positive impact, to build skill sets, and to take on expanded responsibilities. And we're going to go into this a bit more deeply. Your professional profile is made up of 10 key components. And these are the types of things that employers look for and that executive search firms assess when they are trying to fill a particular role. And an accelerated career track requires that you craft a marketable profile over time that is relevant, differentiated, and in demand. Let me quickly walk through these 10 components. Experience, which is really your track record, your relevant skills, and your knowledge. Impact, which is accountability and results. Potential, your ability to grow, your promotability. Stability, and what I mean here is stability of employment. And you can have too much stability, where you begin to stagnate, or you can have too little stability, where you're moving around too quickly and not staying placed long enough to show impact and to build a track record. Quality, and here I mean quality of the organizations and the roles. Presence, these are your soft skills, your interpersonal, your communication and presentation skills, and your ability to collaborate and be a team player. Passion is the energy, the commitment, and the energy that you bring to the job each day. Influence has to do with your credibility, your ability to build strong working relationships, to be an effective part of a team, to drive team execution. Applied intelligence, which is learning agility and adaptability. During my years in search, I did meet executives who had terrific academics, but for whatever the reason, they were less capable in applying their smarts and what they knew to real life work situations. And then the last component is your reputation, which is really exhibited through your references. And it is a great idea to always be conscious of building strong references as you go throughout, the week, the month, the year. The executive profile attractiveness metric, which I refer to as EPAM for short, is a self-diagnostic that was designed to provide an understanding of how attractive your profile is in the market at a given point in time. It's something that you can take periodically to see if your profile is getting stronger. Now, assuming that you've objectively completed the EPAM, your resulting score is going to give you a good indication of the strength and attractiveness of your profile. Your individual scores across the 10 profile components are going to give you a nice indication of where you're stronger and lesser developed. If you haven't, why don't you take out your completed EPAM, and I'm going to share here the scoring grid with you. If you scored in the 85 to 100 point range, you have a very good to excellent profile, and recruiters are going to want to have you on their radar. You scored in the 70 to 84 point range, you have a solid to good profile. You're a reasonable prospect for many opportunities, but you're likely going to experience stiff competition for the most attractive roles. If you scored in the 45 to 69 point range, your profile really is not yet effectively distinguishing you from your peers. So you have some nice opportunity to improve. Now, you may have scored lower because you're earlier in your career and it's still taking form. Or if you're mid-career and you scored in this range, you probably haven't been paying sufficient attention to effectively managing your professional development. Hopefully, we don't have a lot of people scoring in the 30 to 44 point range or less than 29. But if you are in the 44 point range, you really need to begin to take some constructive action. And this constructive action is some of what I'm going to share with you in the upcoming slides. Okay. In terms of building and leveraging your further building and leveraging your profile, there are 3 points that I want to make. The first is that you need to determine where and how you can more fully employ the strongest components of your profile. If you're in a role right now where you are not taking advantage of your strengths, you're not going to be achieving career velocity. The second point, Design an action plan to address the lesser developed components of your professional profile. If some of these deficiencies are less likely to become stronger, then pursue opportunities that are less dependent on those shortcomings or that can be supported and shored up by the organization and staff hires. The third point, in my experience, most executives possess one, two, maybe three, several critical skill sets that are stronger than, let's say, 80 to 90% of their peer group. Examples of these types of critical skill sets would be problem solving, organizing, managing, synthesizing information, analyzing, and so on. These strengths I often refer to as foundational strengths, and they are exhibited earlier throughout your life, but maybe they're not fully recognized or leveraged. And what you should do is, if you've never stepped back to develop an impression or an idea of what these distinguishing skills are, think about the things that you've done throughout your life where you have succeeded and the skill sets that came into play. If you're able to leverage these, it's going to be game changing, and it's going to lead to much higher job satisfaction. Selecting the right opportunities is very important if you're going to accelerate your career. Job selections are the most critical decisions that you make repeatedly throughout your career. And every poor or uninformed job decision that you make becomes a significant career decelerator. There are factors that I believe you should consider when looking at and saying yes to what the right opportunity is. And these factors are a personal belief that you can make an impact. And this is not to say that you shouldn't stretch, you should, that's how you grow. But you have to believe that there's a very good likelihood that you're going to be able to be successful. The opportunity to grow and develop new skills is important if you're going to continue to shape and build your profile. Is it a fit with your longer term objectives and interests? Everybody should have an end goal in mind. And it's not that has to be permanent. It's not that it can't change. But if you have some sort of end goal that you're building towards, it'll help you stay more focused. Another factor is the quality of the opportunity and the organization. Others are the people, your boss, how strong is the chemistry? The culture. What I mean by culture is how business and how the work is done day to day. The financial viability of the organization. You do not want to be in a situation where a year later or 2 years later, you have questions as to whether the organization is going to continue to be viable. Then you're just going to be looking again. That's a career decelerator. And then you want to make sure that based on the expectations that people have for the role that you would be stepping into, is there a sufficient level of resources? Let me next talk about the second topic. And these are, actually, this is a third topic, career accelerants. There are ways to accelerate your professional profile. There are things that you can do to accelerate the quality of opportunities that you receive in the market. With respect to professional profile accelerants, I'm going to share with you some thoughts about multidimensional awareness, the leadership differential, and strategic and timely industry transitions. With respect to opportunity accelerants, I'm going to talk about how important strategic market positioning is. And this is an area that a lot of executives do not give an appropriate amount of thought. I'm going to talk about the importance of compelling value propositions and executive profile summaries. And I'm going to show you some examples of well-written ones. And then we're going to talk about, and I'm going to provide a few suggestions on effective interviewing. None of these other things make any difference if you can't interview effectively, because that's what's going to secure you the opportunity in many cases. Okay, here's what I mean by multidimensional awareness. As you go throughout your workday or work week, there are different types of awareness that come into play. There's self-awareness, which is your understanding of your strengths, your shortcomings, personality, interests, desires, communication, response to stress. There's situational awareness. And here, what you might do is think about the Navy SEALs or Special Operations Forces. The ability to observe, assess, and react effectively to what is going on around you. It's understanding priorities, the playing field, the role players, and what the key leverage points are. Another example of situational awareness would be an executive who has had repeated assignments in turnaround situations. That because of their experience and their knowledge, they get into a situation like that and they understand what they need to take a look at, what they need to fix, the team members that need to be recruited. There's listening awareness, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's your ability to focus openly and actively on what others are saying or doing without being distracted. There's feedback awareness, your ability to recognize, receive, and act on informal and formal feedback, often in the moment. Informal feedback would be those signals that you get during the course of your day, whether it's in a meeting or you're giving a presentation or various situations. Formal feedback would be direct feedback from most likely the individual who you report to. It could be a performance review. And then finally, there's reputation awareness. And what I mean by that is having an understanding of how the external world views your presence and impact in professional and often also personal settings. Similar to effectively managing your career, reputation awareness is your responsibility. Nobody's going to do that for you. So, you need to take the bull by the horns. The best executives that I've ever met throughout the years have a very high degree of multidimensional awareness. And these aware professionals, they just have a curiosity, an active curiosity about the world around them. And this is how they learn, grow, improve, and envision what potential opportunities are, either where they work or where the opportunities are going to be in the future. I do have some suggestions for becoming more aware. It's a muscle, and you have to use it to develop it. So, practice mindfulness, being in the moment. And what you might do, if you feel that you're lacking in one or several of these dimensions of awareness, work on one dimension per week. And in order to remain some consciousness about what you're working on, put a pebble in your pocket if you're going into the office. And every time you stick your hand in your pocket and feel that pebble, ask yourself, okay, I'm working on being self-aware today. Am I self-aware right now? Or if you're working from home, you might put a something that's very noticeable on your desktop, your desk, so that when you look down at it, it's a reminder that am I, in this Zoom meeting, am I being mindful of what's going on in the meeting? The second suggestion I have is, as you collect this input, I think it's important to take time to think about your observations and the input that you've received. And is there anything that maybe I should be doing differently as a result of these observations and input? The second accelerant for professional profile that I want to talk is about the leadership differential. Leadership skills enhance your profile, your market positioning, and serve to further differentiate you. Now, the nice thing about leadership is that it can be exhibited at most any level of an organization. It's not reserved for senior management. Leadership, again, in my experience over 30 years in search, is always in demand. There are never enough really good leaders to go around. And because of this, leadership is paid a premium. When I would be interviewing candidates for a particular search, I would look for evidence of leadership in their professional profiles or resumes. And what you might do after this session is take a look at your resume. And is there evidence of leadership within your resume, or do you need to further develop that? Or maybe you've forgotten about instances where you did exhibit leadership and it can be part of your resume. And there are different types of leadership, right? But a lot of it comes down to impact and results. Different types of leadership might be thought leadership or strategy leadership. It could be P&L or revenue leadership. It may be leadership that is evident because of a span of responsibility. It could be leadership that is evident because of the size of staff relative to a function or within a company. Back about 4 years ago, I had a wonderful opportunity to sit down with the professor of leadership at Kellogg Business School, who was a good friend and mentor of mine. He had been a former investment banker, CEO, he'd been a board director, and the express purpose of our getting together was to talk about leadership and those traits and abilities that highly effective leaders have. And this was about a 2-hour discussion. And this boils it down to the list that we came up with. So as I read through this, ask yourself to what degree you're able to exhibit these traits. Willingness to shoulder accountability, decisiveness, great judgment, organizational smarts, passion, unwavering focus on the mission, energy, resilience, positive attitude, strategic acumen, the ability to build great teams, the willingness to take calculated risks, the ability to inspire and influence others, a take charge mentality, vision, in other words, being able to connect the dots, your interpersonal listening and engagement skills, integrity, and then strength in the midst of uncertainties and pressures. The third profile accelerant that I want to talk about are strategic industry transitions, which is what this fish is doing here, taking a leap. An estimated 50% of executives transition industries. Why did they do this? Well, they do it to build some versatility into their professional profiles. Maybe they do it to enter a growth industry where theirs may be stagnated or on decline. They do it to renew energy and intellectual stimulation. And they do it to reposition themselves more favorably on the supply and demand curve, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. I have found that there are certain functions that transition more readily than others. And these include marketing, finance, human resources, general management, IT, and strategy. Some examples of functions that I think are a little bit more challenged in transitioning would be those roles that are really industry or technology specific. So manufacturing or sales or product development. The keys to a successful industry transition are your ability to observe, learn, adapt, and influence. This insight resulted from a study that I did, led while I was at Spencer Stuart. We noticed that in the market, there were people that we refer to as best athletes. Individuals who are able to make multiple industry transitions successfully. And what we were able to isolate were things that they have, such as high learning agility, the ability to deal with ambiguity, tenacity, willingness to listen, influencing skills, cultural and political sensitivity, change management aptitude, and innate curiosity. Now, if you think of yourself as having or exemplifying a number of these strengths, you're probably in a pretty good position, or you probably have a pretty good profile for being able to transition successfully. Within this same study, when we took a look at the backgrounds of executives who transition readily, we found that there were often prior experiences that they had in one or more of the following. Overseas assignments, right? If you think about an executive who is set down in Turkey and they've never been there, and they have to wake up the next morning and decide, where to get milk for breakfast, okay? They're going to have to learn, observe, adapt, and influence. The same is true of professionals who have had experience in different functional roles, okay? Again, you have to go into the new functional role that you have, and it may be adjacent to what you've done in the past, but you have to observe, learn, adapt, and influence. We also found this ability in individuals who have had a series of line and staff positions, which are very different in terms of what they do on a day in, day out basis. Professionals who've had experience in several different divisions of their company, where there are different customer sets, different operating models, different products or service offerings. And then finally, individuals who've had early general management consulting experience. If you think about it for a minute, a general management consultant is constantly going into new clients, and they're having to observe, learn, adapt, and then influence through the recommendations that they make. A suggestion that I do have, if you have not made industry transitions in the past, is to remove any undue risk in your initial industry transition by targeting industry sectors that are more similar to what you've been doing recently, either in terms of business model or customer sets. Then, after you've had one successful transition, okay, and you've learned the transition skill sets and what to be attuned to, you're much more likely to be able to move, instead of from A to C, right, move from C to G. And every time you make a move, you are, again, within reason, broadening your profile. And there are, in the future, that many more opportunities that you're able to be considered for, as opposed to coming up in your career through a single industry and in a very narrow job function. Okay, I promised that I would talk about strategic market positioning. I think a very good way to think about this is the supply and demand curves for talent, not only in the current job market, but where they're projected to be in the future. And to work towards being able to craft a compelling value proposition that positions you more favorably. This is a really key component about accelerating your career, and I'm gonna show you why that's true. At any point in time, you're positioned in one of four possible talent supply and demand scenarios. And I'm going to isolate and talk about the first two because they're extremes of each other. The first is high talent demand, limited talent supply. The second is low talent demand, high talent supply. Okay, think about those just for a minute. What that means, what the setting is like. There are very, very distinct strategic advantages to being able to consistently position yourself in or near high talent demand, limited talent supply scenarios. Okay, you're going to find, if you're able to do this, that you have less competition for positions. You're going to see more opportunities. You're going to experience more rapid advancement. And very importantly, you're going to have greater compensation leverage. Now I'm going to talk about the accelerant number two related to opportunity, and that is your value proposition. Your value proposition is the summation of what you bring to the market and how your background can make a material impact. It needs to be distinct, it needs to be compelling, and it needs to be well supported by evidence in your work history. Why is crafting a value proposition so important? Well, I mean, it is essentially your professional identity. It's what you do. It's the impact. It's also the linchpin that connects key elements of your job campaign. Your resume, it's reflected in your LinkedIn, your elevator pitch, cover letters, the types of opportunities that you target, and importantly, in your interview messaging. Launching a job search without a value proposition is similar to sailing without a rudder. It's not a good idea. Okay, here's some examples of compelling value propositions. The first is an executive that I worked with, a Silicon Valley CEO. And what we developed is the following. Transformational and innovative tech and business services CEO with proven track record of growing and turning around businesses for substantial value creation. One IPO, 5 exits, raising over $230 million in VC funding, generating over $3 billion in shareholder value. Okay, this is distinct, it's compelling, and it has some really good evidence, and of course, the payoff. The next example is a retail marketing executive I worked with. Proven marketing leader with unique ability to identify and leverage white space market opportunities. One example being the mobile business unit built for Best Buy that generated $7.5 billion in incremental revenue, managing budgets of more than $760 million with accountability for 25,000 employees. Again, it's distinct, it's compelling, and it has material evidence and impact. Now, your profile summary, or what I often call the executive summary that's at the top of your resume, should embed your value proposition. Okay. This is maybe one of the most critical things to craft and to develop. Once you have this completed, it's very easy to write the rest of your resume, because what the rest of the resume is doing is providing proof points and data points to support that executive summary. So the summary is the introduction to your resume. It's the attention getter. It makes somebody want to read further. It is a concise, succinct, compelling summary of your career. And it's also the basis of your elevator pitch. Now, here's that Silicon Valley CEO where we added some additional context. Transformational and innovative tech and business services CEO with proven track record of both growing and turning around businesses with substantial value creation. 1 IPO, 5 exits, raising over 230 million in VC funding, generating over 3 billion in shareholder value. Domain expertise in digital, mobile, data and analytics, media, and software/software as a service. Full general management experience in both startup and established settings with responsibility for 50 to 4,000 employees. Okay. The last accelerant for opportunity that I'm going to talk about and share some ideas and suggestions with you for is effective interviewing. And most professionals suffer from either rusty or undeveloped interview skills. So practice and critical feedback are essential in a competitive market. Okay, some suggestions for effective interviewing. Learn to give great video. What you want to be doing with, the Zoom world that we're in is you want to replicate as if you were sitting across the desk directly from someone, that you are well lit, that the audio works, and as if you're just, sitting there talking and engaging. Another suggestion for effective interviewing is adopt the buyer's frame of reference, not the seller's. You're the seller, right? But you need to be positioning what it is you do in terms of what is it that the buyer is trying to solve for, right? What is it that they are looking for someone to do? So that will make it more relevant for them. I think the best interviews are interactive dialogues. It's not a monologue. Often on a search, after a candidate would go in to meet with a client, I would call the candidate and I would say, how did it go? And they would say, it went great. I was so well prepared, and I got to tell the interviewer everything about, what I think they ought to be doing, and all about my experience and why I'm the best candidate. And I'd say, okay. And then I would call the client and I'd say, how did the interview go? And what do you think they said? Well, they said, I could not get Joe or Sally to stop talking. And I don't think they have any listening skills. And once an interviewer starts to question your listening skills, they will begin to question whether you're a team player. So what you want to do during an interview, okay, unless it's a screening interview, which is a very different situation, you want to strive to have an engaged, interactive dialogue where the energy is flowing back and forth. You want to be succinct and relevant. You want to talk in balanced terms of we and I. If you talk about too much we, they're going to wonder, well, gee, what did you do? If you talk with too much I, they're going to wonder, Did you do everything? Was there not anybody else who contributed to this effort? You want to be concrete and numerical with your accomplishments to be able to show concrete impact. And as I mentioned a minute ago, you want to distinguish between different types of interviews, right? The screening interview, the search consultant, or the hiring executive in the team. The screening interviews are typically 20 minutes. They're just trying to get a top line assessment of, do you have these skills? So it's going to be more of a straightforward question and answer, and there's going to be limited opportunity to develop an interactive dialogue. So what you need to do is answer those questions directly and succinctly. The same would be true of, say, if you're interviewing with a research associate within a search firm, they're going to do the initial screening. Now, when you're with the search consultant, okay, it's a different situation. There will be some opportunity to develop interactive dialogue, but the purposes of the search consultant are, number one, to assess whether you're a qualified candidate, and secondly, if you are, to gather all the information that they need to write a compelling candidate report. Now, where you have the most opportunity to develop an interactive dialogue is when you get to meeting the hiring executive or the team on the client side. And again, you have to keep your antenna up and see how they want to manage the interview. But my feeling is that you'll have a little bit more give and take. Okay, well that concludes the accelerants for opportunity. So to kind of summarize and share some final thoughts with you, adopt a proactive mindset to managing your career, build multidimensional awareness, make purposeful and well-reasoned job selections, nurture trusted professional relationships internally and externally, and this also has to do with building your network. Leverage the talent market's supply and demand dynamics, craft a differentiated market positioning and value proposition, conduct periodic objective self-assessments, build your leadership differential, develop exceptional interviewing skills, leverage strategic and timely industry transitions. And for additional help, I would point you towards my book, which is available on Amazon. I think it's achieved pretty much straight 5-star reader reviews. It's been described as the essential go-to guide for navigating your career and maximizing your professional potential. So with that, let me turn this back to Ford and Ken, and we can move on to some question and answer.
Okay. Thank you. Can you hear me okay, Zoe? All right. I wanted to say thank you, Chris. That was extremely informative, very comprehensive, some wonderful tips, wonderful concepts and ideas. They're universal. I think every professional can really benefit from the information you provided. There's a lot of content there. So I'm really glad that we're going to have the slides. I'm really glad we're going to have a recording, because I'm sure that, like everybody else, I want to go through it again, maybe 2 or 3 times, and learn from a lot of the content, which was very, very rich. So thank you again for putting all that together. It was fantastic and a lot to think about, a lot to chew on. I encourage everybody to go through it again when they have time. Now, with regard to questions and answers, we do have some questions that came in through the chat box. Let me see if I can present some of those to you. Okay, Chris?
Okay.
One question says, what are the best tools and resources to find out about high talent demand and low talent supply? Should the value proposition include hints of how? I'm not sure.
I'm sorry, should the value proposition include what?
Hints of how. I don't really understand that last part. Maybe you could just talk about what are some of the best tools or resources to find out about this balance of high talent demand and low talent supply.
Yeah. I think you accomplish that by talking with people who are have a broader perspective on the market, by talking with maybe people who are in similar roles in different industry sectors. I think it also requires that you actively read about changes that are occurring in the market, whether it's with respect to technology, or maybe it's changes in customer behavior, consumer behavior. Those are some of the suggestions that I would have.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We have another question for you, Chris. A person has written in that they are a senior finance leader with a track record of strong results at two large banks, one domestic and one in Australia. He was at each job for at least 5 years. He then moved his family to Washington, D.C. for an opportunity at another institution that did not work out and left after 1 year. He says, how do I balance these two things out? Will recruiters only focus on the latter, meaning the short-term job that didn't work out?
No, I don't believe recruiters will focus only on the past year. 5 years in two different places shows some ability to stick to it, to successfully integrate into an organization. And while I haven't seen this individual's resume, hopefully to really impact the performance of the organization, build teams, whatever. I think it's also incumbent on this individual to be able to express very succinctly why the last move didn't work and what they have learned.
Yeah, I like that. What they've learned, that's the most important thing to convey. Thanks for your experience on that. It's very helpful. Another question is LinkedIn the primary site for a professional profile, or should we also consider using Twitter, Facebook, or a personal website?
If you're talking with respect to a job search, okay, my impression of LinkedIn, now it's changing and it's continuing to evolve, but it's very heavily populated at, say, the director, VP, maybe even SVP level. But the databases of search firms are going to be much more heavily populated at the SVP, EVP, COO, CEO, functional leadership roles. And I do think it's a great tool. I think you have to use it properly and not overly rely on it. If it's more than, again, depending on your level, but if you're mid-career, right? If it's more than 30% of your search activity for a new role, it's that's probably getting close to the upper threshold. You have to keep in mind that when you apply for a role on LinkedIn, it is highly competitive, and that they are screening through 200 or 300 different resumes. And unless you are absolutely exceptional, the probability that they're going to select your profile might be somewhat limited. So when people start a job campaign, they're really, I think, three legs to the stool. The first leg is your professional network and the individuals who know you really well who've worked closely with you and who clearly understand your capabilities, they are going to be the most likely folks to keep you in mind and to try and help you. So that'd be the first reach out, if you would. The second reach out, I think, should be to the executive search firms, and you have to be selective here and make sure that the firm is working at the level where you're at in your career, and that they do work in your functional area and in your industry. And I think it's relatively easy to go into the websites of these search firms and identify. Most of them are set up by practices, and they're both industry practices as well as functional practices and geographies. So it is kind of a matrix, and you can identify the consultants that are most likely to respond to you. The third leg of your campaign, I think, ought to be to target companies where you want to make sure they have your information. And these are companies that will clearly see the value in your profile. And that's something, that you can control. If you're looking to get into a kind of a different sector, right, you can select the target companies and then plan a campaign around the target companies.
Interesting. Thank you for your response. Much appreciated. We have until 1:30 to continue, and I'm happy to say that we do have more questions. So here's another one for you, Chris. What is the best way to determine alignment of personal culture and corporate culture during the search and interview process?
Well, I think a starting point is Glassdoor, and see what people are saying about the company. But you have to take Glassdoor with a grain of salt, because a lot of the people who leave comments on Glassdoor might have recently left and been ill-contents, if you will. I think another way to use LinkedIn is to identify people who are currently or recently with the organization, and to see if you can connect with them. And then I think probably the acid test, if you will, is just being very mindful as you go through the interviewing process. How do people treat each other, and what does their workday look like? How does the receptionist treat you when you walk in? Do they stick to the interview schedule, right? Do they allow you an opportunity to ask questions? So I think that in the final analysis is the acid test. And I think if you become a finalist candidate, not only do you want to spend considerable time with the person that you're going to be reporting to, but you also want to spend time with some of the peers, as well as the subordinates. And every one of those is a data point to see how much consistency there is in culture.
I'm really glad you mentioned the idea of speaking to peers and subordinates. I've learned as a career coach that you get a very different story from the people above than you do necessarily from the people below. In some ways, you get a lot more candid, honest answers from the people at your level or below, in many cases, not in every case. So I often recommend to my clients that they try to interview the interviewers, but not just the hiring manager, also the people at a peer level and the people subordinate to your level. And that way you get a 360-degree view, and frankly, sometimes a more candid statement about the company's culture.
Yep.
So thank you for that. Here's another question for you, Chris. What is the best way to approach the salary conversation so that you're not discounted when interviewing? Of course, that's a very loaded subject. The whole topic of salary is a whole separate seminar. But if you might just touch on it briefly, this person wants to know, how can they engage in the salary conversation without being discounted?
Yeah. Now, I think it's one thing if you're employed, it's another thing if you're not employed. And if you are approached by an internal corporate recruiter or an executive search research associate or consultant, and they want to speak with you about an opportunity, they're going to ask, most likely, at some point, they're going to want to get an idea of your compensation. I think it is also fair for you to ask, what are the compensation parameters for this role? And if they, hem and haw and can't give you, an answer, then, I think you ought to be a little bit circumspect.
Okay.
Based on legislation, right? You're not supposed to ask somebody what their compensation is, but very few firms are going to put together an offer within a vacuum. It's just, it worked like that for so long that I think it's tough for that to be shed. They may be, again, somewhat careful and choose their wording selectively, but I think at the end of the day, they're going to want to have some idea of where your compensation currently is. I would not with the client, I would not raise the compensation question too early in the discussion, because they might figure, well, the only thing you're interested in is how much does it pay, as opposed to first understanding what the opportunity is, what sort of fit is it with your experience and your background.
Sure. And I would just add one thing to your excellent answer. And my comment is this: if you are going through an executive recruiter like Chris, and the job is being handled by an executive search firm, that's sort of one reality. Another reality is if there's no recruiter involved at all, and you're just working directly with the hiring manager or the HR department at the company. It's different. These are different scenarios. So just be aware of what you're getting into. Is it a position that's handled by a search firm or not? So just keep that in mind. There are different ways to behave and different ways to approach the situation depending on that scenario. Here's another question. I'm sorry, go ahead.
What I was going to say was, I hear of instances where somebody gets very excited about an opportunity. They never ask about compensation. It's not offered. And they spend a lot of time and energy going through the recruiting process. And then they get absolutely deflated when it comes to the discussion about compensation. So I do think the earlier that you can appropriately raise it in the process, you want to be spending your time wisely.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance of knowing when to ask and how to ask. It just takes experience, I think, and guidance.
There are some websites online like salary.com and others where you can at least get an initial idea.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Here's another question for you, Chris. How do you get into industries that seem to be closed to anyone who does not have experience in those industries, such as pharmaceutical?
Yeah, well, this comes back to the question of strategic industry transitions. And you need to be able to make a story around where the overlap is and why they should be interested in your background. And without that, either, most likely from a skill set or functional standpoint, unless you can draw on analogies, right, that are relevant, you probably don't have a very strong leg to stand on.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question for you, Chris. I'm in HR with an opportunity in finance. ultimately, I want to be a VP in HR. I'm worried I won't be considered up to date in HR after a few years in finance. How do you suggest I handle this situation?
My own personal reaction to that is I would definitely make the move into finance. It doesn't mean that you're going to be there forever, but there are a lot of HR managers out there, and anything that you can do that distinguishes your profile from the masses, okay, gives you a point of differentiation that you can leverage in the future. So, being in finance for a couple years or whatever, HR is not going to change that quickly or that significantly in several years. But in the meantime, you have gained valuable business insight and operating insight that a number of HR managers probably don't have.
Interesting, interesting. Thank you for your insights. Another question for you. I'm interested in transitioning from corporate to being a consultant, like self-employed consultant. How do executive search recruiters look upon that? Should I put my desire to be in consulting on my LinkedIn profile or stick to my corporate background?
Now, okay, they don't want to start their own consulting firm, but they want to join an established consultancy. Is that correct?
No, they actually are going into their own consultancy, their own consulting firm.
They want to open their, okay, then if they want to open their own consultancy, I don't know why they'd be talking with recruiters.
Well, that's a good question. And the answer is because I happen to know this person. They like the idea of having their own clients, but also getting projects from corporations, sort of like as a part-time consultant with companies. I don't know if recruiters could really be very instrumental in that. What do you think?
No, I don't think that's the right route. Again, without knowing this individual, I think what they need to really crystallize is what are those unique critical skill sets, experiences, and understanding and knowledge that they have that are of value to the market, and then take the appropriate measures to position that effectively and determine how they want to talk about it, how they want to present it, and who the right targets are. Okay. There may be other targets, maybe accounting firms or other other legal firms, right, who can kind of keep them in mind and say, hey, especially if they know the individual and respect the individual.
Right. Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Here's another question.
Okay.
I would like to know Chris's perspective on what one should have and not have on the LinkedIn profile.
I think if you have a really good resume with your executive summary and embedded value proposition, and you've selected, for the rest of the resume, the evidence and data points that supports that positioning. I don't think you have to have quite as much detail as your resume, but hit the high points, and to the extent that you can tell a little bit of a story and make sure that you have the appropriate context. I think that'll communicate effectively. What I do see with a lot of resumes, and I think this is something that I think people learn on graduation. Most of the graduation resumes it's really a list of bullet points, and those are what I call machine gun resumes because they're full of bullets. And what happens with that type of resume is that people start to mix position content with achievements. to the extent that the achievements really don't stand out or jump off the page. And I think that you need to reserve the use of bullet points for key accomplishments, and then have enough context about the company and the position, the challenges, et cetera, that there is some story that's being told that'll make it more interesting for the reader.
Well said. And you and I are certainly on the same page when it comes to differentiating the job's roles and responsibilities from the achievements or accomplishments that you had in that job. We can't blend them together. We have to be able to see the distinction. So thank you for mentioning that.
It's also, I think, with respect to, there are a lot of companies out there that people aren't familiar with. And just having one sentence that describes, what is this company, helps the reader put the position into context.
Well said. I appreciate that. Here's another question. Should the value proposition be just a list of achievements, or should it also communicate how one was able to get these results?
It should not be a list of achievements, because then it would be too long. It should be an accomplishment or achievement that is exemplary of what you do and the value that you bring. And it should have within it a payoff that says, here's the value that was created. What was the second part of the question? How it was done? No, that would be too lengthy. Again, this is just a headline, right?
Got it. Thank you for that.
Now, what you might say within the executive summary is something like, reputation for building effective teams, whatever, those critical skill sets are, the 2 or 3 within your profile.
Very good. Thank you. Another question for you. Can you talk a little bit more about how to best manage the different types of interviews that I will go through? I guess they mean screening interviews, approval interviews, hiring interviews.
Yes. Yeah, I think the screening interview is basically going to be question answer. And ideally, before you have that screening interview, you ought to make sure that you have a copy of the position specification from either the internal recruiter or from the research associate at the search firm, so that you can take a look at that, right? And see what are the most important elements of this spec, and what can I talk about in my background that will position me as being capable in these areas. Most of the specs that are written today you should be able to identify, and some are even called out by critical competencies, right? So, critical competencies might be leadership or managing or problem solving. And you should be able to discern within the spec what the most critical competencies are. And then think about, right, there are behavioral-based questions, competency-based questions. Tell me about a time where you had to overcome conflict with a group that, where you needed their cooperation, right? And, there's the STAR method: setting, task, action, result, or opportunity, action, result. And this is very hard to do on the spot, which is why you want to do a little bit of preparation up front, so that if they ask you a question like that, you can very succinctly, without making it a long answer, provide an answer. So I think the screening interviews are pretty much straightforward question answer. The interview with a search consultant, right? when they produce a position specification, it is after having spent a number of hours with the client, understanding the need, the requirements for the role, what the ideal candidate looks like, what the challenges are. And before you meet with a search consultant, again, man, study that spec, and really say, well, okay, what's being said here? And then even try and read between the lines and be prepared to offer the evidence that that individual needs to produce a compelling candidate report.
Thank you. That's very, very good. Very useful. One more quick question and then we'll wrap up. Okay, Chris?
Okay.
This question says, do you have any quick tips on Zoom virtual interviews, such as dress code, background, taking notes?
You do not want to have a background that is distracting. You want the person to be focused on you. I would not. Again, you're trying to engage, and you're trying to connect. So if you're looking down, taking copious notes, if you're spending all that time down here, you're not engaging and you're not developing a connection. I mentioned, some of the basics, like, make sure that you're well lit, that you're appearing, that the audio is good. I think Zooms are a bit of a subdued medium. So I think you have to, again, within a spectrum that you're comfortable with, you need to be your best self, right? You need to show your enthusiasm. You need to show some interest in the conversation and attentiveness to what the other person is saying and responding in kind. So don't be afraid to use your hands. Smiles go a long way. And a lot of people get on these Zooms and they are so serious that you wonder, gee, is there a person there? I mean, this ought to be fun, right? Life is too short to do it in any other way.
You mean going to an interview is not the same as getting root canal?
No, it shouldn't be. And one thing we didn't remark on was it is important to, before you have the interview, some obvious things that I'm sure a lot of people do, but I'll mention them anyway. Know something about the company. Know something about the people who are going to be interviewing you. And the more informed you are, the easier the conversation is going to be. And it doesn't mean that you have to recite everything that you've learned, but you'll have a context for how to answer certain questions that they ask.
Got it.
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.